Hello and welcome to the mini expansion card reveal. So now that we've had every single card revealed and we've only got a few hours before the, of course, maintenance will both start and end as of when I'm making this, which is about 6 hours out from when the mini expansion should drop, at least according to their times, but that could be a little longer or a little shorter either way. But getting right into it, of course, we're going to start with the neutral gold. These are in reverse release order, just for convenience. And we have got the 7-drop 6/5 gold, which is Steel-clad Minotaur, so definitely an interesting card. It's got an Excel 4, summon 2 Minotaurs, and ward. Whenever this follower is attacked, gained +2. While not a crazy good card, I still think it's a reasonably decent ward for its, of course, cost. As a 7-drop, you're effectively going to be getting a 6/7 on any kind of attack, minimum. Of course, it's going to be much harder with spells because, of course, the 6/5, but 5 is a pretty safe from spell zone. It would require 1 or 2 more spells than normal, unless, of course, you're going up against Rune, which has much higher removal. But overall, I'm actually okay with this card. The Excel 4 seems okay with Minotaurs. I believe they're 2-drop 2/2s off the top of my head. I could be wrong. Don't use Minotaurs much, but I believe that's pretty good for a 4-drop. Being able to get 2 followers out of it, and both neutral, could bring back some form of neutral craft in the future. Might be interesting. Then we have the Havencraft Legendary, the Saint Hairs. Definitely an interesting looking card. I love the artwork. It is a 1-drop 1/2, so following a Snow White stat line, except of course costing 1, much cheaper. Fanfare, enhance 4, put 2 random followers that cost 1 play point or less from your deck into play. And then of course an extra effect is at the end of your turn, put an Saint Hair into your deck. So I really like that part of this effect. Putting the Saint Hair into your deck is really good. It means infinite value on this card, which is always a nice thing to have for cheap cards. So having a nice 1-drop is always good. But the Involve effect is where things get more interesting. So we got, give your leader the following effect. At the end of your turn, give +1/+0 to all allied followers with that cost 1 play point or less. This effect is not stackable and lasts for the rest of the match. And of course, at the end of your turn, put a Saint Hairs into your deck. So, of course, keeping its main effect. But the giving your leader effect is actually really nice. Being able to, for just a single Evo point on turn 4, randomly get 2 followers and bring them from deck into play. Really nice, as if you're setting up a good deck, you could easily work around that, since goblins will work with this card. Then you've also, of course, got the end turn, which will add the +1. Really nice. So you're going to be getting a pretty decent board on turn 4. You're getting a minimum of 3 followers with a good setup with this card. And with an Evo, you're going to be getting those buffs, which is really good. I actually really want to use this card. Hopefully you can make use of it in Haven. Haven's going to be a little more awkward than most decks, but potentially a more aggressive Haven deck or more mid-rangey Haven deck could handle this. I've been thinking that possibly going for a Temple deck could work in this card, similar to how Snow White functioned most of the time, just because of how much value it has on its own as a single card, not having to use anything else major to support it. It still makes it really good. Then we have Skim It, which is a 3-drop 2/3 Havencraft Gold. Love this artwork as well, really nice ones. It's actually got the lion theme to it, but not being a lion card. A little disappointing. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all other followers. At the end of your turn, give +1 to all other followers. So then gets +2 damage. It gets +1 damage on top of that, and +1 extra on top of that for its evolve effect, just increasing its bonuses. This card actually isn't too bad. If you plan out a board and clear it and then buff everything on your own, is really good. Even potentially just buffing your opponent sometimes might not be the worst case scenario for this card, but overall, not a bad 3-drop, 3-drop 2/3, nice stat line, with its buff going up to a 2/4. That makes it a slightly better stat line. Then we have Enraged Commander, a 4-drop 3/3 legendary for Bloodcraft. So, a fanfare, if Vengeance is active for you, give Bloodcraft follower in your hand Storm. If this is your 10th turn or later and Vengeance is active for you, give all Bloodcraft followers in your hand Storm. So I don't mind this card, even as a generic 4-drop 3 damage Storm card. It's actually, well, sorry, not as a Storm card, but with the Evo it does become a 5/5 Storm, so it's actually still pretty decent card on 4 with an Evo, and being able to give something in your hand Storm could make some very interesting combinations. I mean, a good turn 5 play with this could be nuts. The only real tricky part is getting that Vengeance active, but as you're going to see with the Blood Gold in a second, that's going to become a little bit easier in rotation format, which is always a nice thing. So we're going to go Shadow first because they're not in perfect order, but Gluttonous Empress, 7-drop 5/5 gold. Fanfare, randomly put a Shadowcraft follower, excluding Gluttonous Empress, that costs X play points or less from your deck into play. Then destroy that follower. X equals your total number of play point orbs. Whenever another allied follower is destroyed, restore 2 defense to your leader. And then it, of course, retains that on the Evo with full Evo stats. So, randomly putting a Shadowcraft follower that costs X play points is actually not bad. I mean, you get anything that's worth that. So you're going to get a pretty much guaranteed 7 or less card out of this, which is always a nice thing to get. And bringing it into play instead of to hand, it makes it just, of course, that much better. And you don't even need an Evo for this. So that's what makes this card quite nice. Of course, it is then destroyed, so you've got to make sure it's definitely going to be a decent last word card. That's the important part of this. I've been trying to come up with interesting ways this could work, and my best guess would actually be to combo this with a Mordecai deck. Running this in, of course, reanimate versions of Shadow, especially for Unlimited, could be absolutely insane. You would play this on turn 8, and you wouldn't have to worry about guaranteeing Mordecai in your hand because this card would do it for you. And that's actually a pretty good way to do it. Plus, it would heal you for 2, so definitely interesting. And if anything to go off with Sedwin, this card could be reasonably easy to abuse going forward. Of course, it still limits the card's playability to turn 8, but definitely a solid one for Shadow as a gold. Then we have Lyca's Berserker, a 2-drop 2/2 gold. That's the Bloodcraft gold card. Last word, if this follower's attack was at least 4 before being destroyed, put a Blood Moon into your hand and change its cost to 1. So this, obviously similar to the last card, is hand buff blood support, but at the same time, even without the hand buff blood support, it's not a bad card. Going first, this card could be quite decent. You play it, you evolve it, ends up with 4, suicide it, you get a Blood Moon. You could even play that turn if you wanted to, but if it was me, I'd probably hold it for turn 6 and do a combo with something like the card we saw last turn, which is really quite good. So not bad overall. We always talked about early on when Vengeance was kind of dying off due to the rotations that for Vengeance to come back, we were going to need some decent way to have a discounted Blood Moon if we wanted to really bring Vengeance back, or just some other big Vengeance activators similar to how Belf was without losing too much health, because the problem was a lot of cards now can get you from 10 to 0 very quickly without much issue on the kind of mid turns, and Blood, of course, doesn't like that. But this card has the potential to, of course, secure you that spot, get Vengeance active, and really take the game from there. So I can't wait to mess around with this and see how it goes. Then we have Tartarus, the Tormentor, the 12-drop 8/8 Shadowcraft follower. So this card, quite interesting, mainly because, of course, being a 12/12 works with one of the other cards, which off the top of my head I can't remember, but it's support for that, and that's always nice. We were always thinking we were going to get a 12-drop Shadow card to support one of the previous legendaries. Accelerate 2, summon a Tartarus the Tormentor, then destroy it and put a Lurker in the Dark into your hand. Ambush, whenever this follower attacks. If ambush is active for this follower, destroy all enemy followers with 5 or less defense. So as an Excel, this is where it's probably most important right now, as the Excel is the more playable effect on 2, especially since it summons and destroys, which is basically a free Shadow at that point. And getting the Lurcher in the Dark into your hand, which is an 8-drop 3/3 ward. Fanfare, reanimate X. X equals the numbers of shadows you have. Actually supports the legendary on its own, so that's not so bad overall. Of course, it is slow, so if you did play this on 2, you could be in a little bit of trouble. But if we're looking long term, at least it has some potential, and that's what I like to see. A card that has an interesting effect, interesting combination with its tokens, and has some pretty nice art overall. So that should be a lot of fun. Then we have Orb of Desecration, a 1-drop amulet for Portalcraft. Countdown 25, Fanfare, enhance 5, subtract 15 from this amulet's countdown. That will bring it down to 10. Whenever an allied follower is destroyed, subtract 1 from this countdown. Whenever an allied follower evolves, subtract 2 from this countdown. Last word, summon an Avatar of Desecration. So this card I'm actually interested in giving a solid go. Avatar of Desecration here is an 8-drop 4/4 Bane. At the end of your turn, randomly put 2 different Portalcraft followers from your deck into play. The into play bit being important. The mini expansion seems to be focusing on the interplay effect a little bit, and that's quite cool, but interplay with random Portalcraft followers could be nuts. If we can find super fast ways to activate Orb of Destruction, whether it's through puppets, whether it's just through full-on artifact suicides, whatever we can get, this could potentially have some playability. The issue does become that if you wanted to take really good advantage of this card, you would want to have as many puppets in hand as possible, play this on 5, suicide all your puppets, or just play them out, and then trigger this as quickly as possible. But by turn 5, Orb of Desecration, not quite as nice. So definitely iffy on that. If we could get this out before turn 5, you'd have a lot of potential, but I don't see an easy way to do that unless your opponent, of course, destroys this amulet, since we don't actually have a way to destroy this amulet, I don't believe. I don't even think there is a good way to do it in Unlimited. I definitely have to look into that, but if I could find a possible way to do it, triggering this earlier than turn 5 would be nuts. So definitely something I would love to experiment with and give a go, and I don't mind seeing a 1-drop amulet for Portal, because turn 1 for Portal is usually one of its weaker turns, excluding, of course, going full-on aggression or going just for an artifact generation. They're really the only 2 decent plays, so having an amulet you can just kind of slam to board and that gives you a long-term effect might actually work out pretty well. Then we have Master Dealer, the 7-drop 5 and 9 gold Swordcraft Officer. Ward, Fanfare, select 1 card in your hand and discard all other cards in your hand. Draw a card for each card you discarded. Selecting 1 card in your hand is actually great. This card has some potential to bring Spartacus Sword to rotation. I've had a lot of fun playing Spartacus Sword in Unlimited because, of course, Altered Fate works miracles. This card, unfortunately, is not great support for Unlimited. I will probably still give it a go, but because turn 7 is typically where you want to win in Unlimited when you're running Spartacus Sword, and you're usually relying on Alter Fate, Alter Fate, Alter Fate to win those turns, I just don't see this card being super great. I mean, as a one-of maybe, it's got some potential, but I would definitely favor Alter Fate in that situation. But as far as rotation goes, we don't really have any support, and this card is actually not a bad one for that, being both a ward to buy you a turn, discarding your entire hand and redrawing to obviously thin your deck out for Spartacus, actually makes it a pretty okay card. Then we have a Geos Runehammer, so the 2-drop 1/1 rune card, so a pretty cheap rune card. It does have a Bane, and of course the evil is put a random runecraft spell without spell boost from your deck in your hand. Reveal the card, gain +X+X, X equals the original cost of that spell. So I do believe there are some 9-cost spells minimum, I think, that aren't spell boostable, sorry. And I think that would mean you could potentially, of course, on turn 4, if you're going second, turn 5 going first, have a 10-10, which would be pretty nuts. I will have to look into that. I'll probably do that right now and be right back. So after having a quick flick through the spells that Runecraft would have available for a deck, the most likely thing you could do is have 7-drop spells that aren't spell boostable, meaning this would be basically a 4-drop 8/8, which is still pretty solid. The only other option would be to play Kaikaitis on 3, get Azeroth Reckoning into your deck, which would make a 10-drop spell, and then use this card, which would both pull Azeroth Reckoning and actually give you an 11/11. That's a combo I would absolutely love to pull off, and if I get a playset of this card, I think it's one I'll actually aim to do for a video for you guys, because that would be a really cool combo to see go off, even if you don't win the game, as that's really, really cool. Otherwise, I think 7 is definitely the most likely. You have an 8-drop spell card for Rune that would be available that you could use. That's a spell that unfortunately is a spell boost. That's the Fiery Embrace, or Fiery, I can't remember. The one that destroys stuff, unfortunately, so that's not usable. The only other option is Final Curse, but I believe that's a token spell, or if it isn't, it's another kind of generated spell, so I don't think that might be possible on turn 9. If it is, I'll have to redouble check it, but I don't know if that one would be possible, and if it is, I'm pretty sure it'd be limited, so a little unfortunate. Otherwise, still an insane card, still extremely high stats for turn 4 play, and it has Bane, which means even as a 2-drop 1/1, it does kill basically any follower, so always good to see. Then we do have the Dancing Blade Swordcraft Legendary, the 10-drop 3/3. It does have Excel 2, deal 3 damage to enemy follower, Excel 7, deal 3 damage to all enemy followers, and of course, if you play it as a 10-drop, it does have Storm and can attack twice. This is effectively a more late-game Albert, in a sense, which is interesting. There is a combination with the 5-drop spell card for Sword that can actually pull a Swordcraft follower officer from your hand and play it to the board and give it rush. With this, absolutely insane. You play that combination on turn 5, you have an instant 10 damage for the evolve, then it gets sent back to your hand where you could potentially play it again, and the next turn, which would be pretty devastating with that combination and potentially a way to take off, or build a reasonably cheap and fast sword deck. So that could be a lot of fun to mess around with, and one I'd love to give another go as well, as I think it's got some potential. Otherwise, as a 10 drop, I think it's probably a little late game, probably a little hard to pull off unless you're running a more control style variant sword and not looking to win turn 6 through 8 like most sword decks typically do, but could definitely be an interesting one to play out. Also, 7 drop, deal 3 damage is very generic. It would have been better as a 6 drop, deal 3 to all. Then we have Anros, a 3-drop 2/3 gold Dragoncraft follower. Fanfare, if Overflow is active for you, deal 1 damage to an enemy follower, evolve, gain an empty play point orb. Actually a pretty decent card overall. I was considering something like Roy normally when I was looking at this card, because Roy is another 3-drop gold. It is a 2/2, which makes its stat line worse, and typically you're using it to get a play point orb by generating it at the moment in current decks. This card would do it for you, of course a little bit later because it would need an evo point, but at the same time this card doesn't appear to be quite as dead in the later game, I guess I could say, because its stats are fairly decent. Although Roy, of course, does have its removal spell, which is pretty good in a mirror, so I think it's up in the air for me between those two. As far as though like Dragon Sword or any kind of card like that goes, I feel like this card is better, although more expensive, making it a little more awkward. Then we have a Hornet Queen, the 8-drop 6/5 legendary for Forestcraft. Fanfare, summon 2 Hornet Warriors. Whenever an allied Hornet Warrior attacks the enemy leader, put a Hornet Sting into your hand. Whenever an allied Hornet Warrior attacks the enemy leader, put a Hornet Sting into your hand as the evolve effect as well. Not too bad. I mean, summon 2 Hornet Warriors is actually okay. They aren't, of course, the best card in the world, but they're alright overall, so a pretty meh card in my opinion. I would like to see a decent play, but an 8-drop card like this could be a little awkward and a little tricky to kind of work around, but could be cool for Forest to have. Then we have Lena and Lena's Tweener Souls, 4-drop 2/4. Storm, Fanfare, if at least 2 other cards were played this turn, evolve this follower. Storm can attack 2 times per turn. This card is actually super aggressive, which is a nice thing to see for Forest, I guess. The only real trick to this is making sure you can, of course, play 2 cards before it to get both the free Evo and the Storm, which is always great. And because it is an Evolve This Follower, I believe Evolve This Follower effects that are automatic don't require you to activate your Evolve effect, unlike ones that reduce Evolve cost to 0. So I believe you'd be able to evolve two cards, so that could actually be even better. You could potentially get this on a 4 if you, of course, set up early on with a couple of 0-cost cards, and on turn 5 if you're, of course, going first. Or actually, no, still on turn 4 with 0-cost cards going first. That's actually still pretty insane. Being able to attack twice definitely helps it out, although it doesn't gain any Evo stats, so it is still just going to be 4 straight-up damage, which is pretty meh for a 4-drop. So, still good. Not as good as it could be. I think this will work better in a mid-range where you're boosting it with some other cards first, but still a super solid gold, especially compared to the legendary that Forest got. Telic, a 4-drop 5/3 legendary Dragoncraft card. Evolve, deal 1 damage to all enemies. Give your leader the following effect. Whenever an allied follower attacks, if you have at least 3 play points, use 3 play points and deal damage to all enemies. So this is where this card is interesting. It does give you a leader effect, which is pretty good. Leader effects at the moment, of course, having no counters. Deal 1 damage to all enemies is not entirely bad, especially on a 4-drop 5/3. That's pretty decent with the Evo, which goes, of course, to a 5/7. Then, whenever an allied follower attacks, if you have at least 3 play points, use 3 play points and deal 1 damage to all enemies. And that being the leader effect means you don't need this necessarily to activate it. Could make it a really solid late game card. The only real drawback is, of course, having to have 3 free play points to use, but if you get dragged into a later game or you're playing Take 2, this card would be very easy to trigger and could really decimate your opponent's boards over and over again. And being all enemies is a guaranteed ping to face as well, so not bad at all. And no, sorry, the 3 play point effect is actually only followers, isn't it? Whenever an allied follower attacks, if you have 3 play points deal. No, it is still all enemies. 1 damage to all enemies, so still quite solid looking at it. Definitely, I can't really fault the card overall. It's just solid. Then we have lovely Heart Monica, a 4-drop 3/3, getting another Monica card out of the way. It is a gold runecraft card. Fanfare, summon a Mora Monica's Familiar. Evolve, deal X damage to an enemy follower. X equals the number of allied followers in play. So that's of course why it does summon its own Familiar, because the Evolve effect, of course, minimum is going to give you a 2 damage to an enemy follower, and that's quite good. And the, of course, Familiar is a 7-drop 1/1 gold. But since it is summoned, it's not as much of an issue. Is it summoned? Yes, summoned, so that's okay. And it does have an Excel 3, recover 1 evolution point, so still a pretty reasonable card. Fanfare, summon a lovely Heart Monica, recover 1 evolution point. Last word, at the start of your next turn, put a Moria Monica's Familiar into your hand. Last word, at the start of your next turn, put a Moria Monica's Familiar into your hand, of course retaining the last word. Another card that can give you basically infinite value off it, not quite as infinite as, of course, the Haven one, as soon as this card is banished, you're going to, of course, lose out. Also, you have the risk of Sword stealing the last word effect, which is not a fun thing to have happen on these kind of cards. But because it is a Fanfare and it does recover an evolution point as well, that's not too bad, even though it does cost 7, so potentially a 7-drop 3/3 might be a little understated. But if you do get in a drawn-out rune game in a different kind of deck cost, we wouldn't put this in Mysteria, and I'd be very iffy on putting it in Spell Boost or Dirt Rune. You'd want to put it in a more tempo-based rune deck, I think, or a Prophetess type rune deck. That's where this card could kind of work, and might be a little bit of fun since it does give you a pretty much guaranteed 4 and 7-drop card, and that tends to be where I typically was struggling with Prophetess decks, having only 1 or 2 decent 4 and 7-drop cards, so not too bad. Then we have Misha, Hero of Purgation, a 3-drop 2/3 gold Portalcraft follower. Fanfare, draw a card, can't attack the enemy leader. Evolve, put a Purgation Blade into your hand, can attack the enemy leader. So with an Evo, it does give it the ability to attack the enemy leader. That's actually not too bad at all, especially for its stat line. Drawing a card, again, pretty decent, especially in Portal. And Purgation's Blade is actually a 7-drop spell, which gives +4 and Storm to an allied Portalcraft follower. If that follower is Maisha, Hero of Purgation, give +X instead. X equals the number of allied followers destroyed during this match. So as a 10-drop combo, this card is absolutely crippling in a puppet deck. This is a finisher, 100%. You could easily get this thing up to 20 damage with little to no problem. I mean, you play the Maisha, you evolve it, you end up with a 4/5. You then play Purgation Blade, giving it Storm, and +X for everything destroyed. Would really only require you to have 16 total cards destroyed by turn 10, which in both Puppets and Artifact is not unrealistic at all. So definitely one I want to give a solid go as a goal, and add to any kind of late game decks, which I have found Portal doesn't do a bad job at doing. I mean, when you're running the Omen of Destruction cards, a card like this, unless it of course gets warded out, is pretty much unstoppable, so definitely a little bit of fun. Other than of course damage reduction cards, which people do run typically to fight Mysteria and Portal anyway, but definitely a card that could have some pretty epic ramifications for it. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. We have now covered all 17 cards from this expansion, and of course all their token cards, which meant there was 22 total new cards. A lot of fun, fairly interesting ones. Honestly, they are not the most interesting, but when you're only adding 17 cards, there's only so much you can add to the game. We're not going to see any changes with nerfs either, because they're just not happening this month, which is no surprise with what they've been adding. I really hope these cards can shake things up at least enough that we see a slight shift or deterrent of the top decks, and some of the tier 2 decks can move up a little bit, which would be nice. I would love to see these Portal cards particularly get some play. I don't want to see them just kind of be dead and unusable. And Forestcraft at the moment definitely needs some love, so I'm hoping another aggro forest deck can potentially come out, something reasonably cheap for people, as budget forest actually is usually a pretty fun deck and pretty easy to build. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe for more content. You will find anything important in the links in the description below. Until next time, see ya.